I was lying on the operating table, about to give my kidney to my dying brother, when my 8-year-old daughter, Piper, burst through the doors and shouted something that made every doctor in that room freeze. My name is Waverly, and I'm about to tell you how my daughter saved my life by exposing a family secret that nobody saw coming. I'm a 34-year-old single mother who teaches 4th grade at Riverside Elementary, the kind of person who brings homemade cookies to parent-teacher conferences and stays late to help struggling students, the kind of person who always puts family first. My brother James is 3 years older than me. Growing up, he was the golden child who could do no wrong. Star quarterback in high school, successful real estate developer by 30, married to a former beauty queen named Carmen. He had the house with the white picket fence, the luxury SUV, the vacation photos from Europe. Meanwhile, I was driving a 10-year-old Honda and clipping coupons to make ends meet. My daughter Piper is 8 years old, quiet as a mouse but sharp as a tack. She notices everything. The way people's voices change when they're lying. The way adults spell out words they think she won't understand. The way her grandmother Loretta only calls when she needs something. My mother, Loretta, is the kind of woman who runs her family like a small country where she's the supreme ruler. She decided who hosted Thanksgiving, who got birthday parties, and who was in or out of the family's good graces. My father, Vernon, learned 40 years ago that the secret to a peaceful marriage was letting Loretta make all the decisions. 3 weeks before I found myself on that operating table, I was just a tired single mom trying to make it through another school year. I had no idea that my daughter had been collecting evidence like a tiny detective. I had no idea that my brother's perfect life was built on a foundation of lies. And I definitely had no idea that the words family duty would become the most dangerous phrase I'd ever hear. But when Piper ran into that operating room, when she stood there in her school uniform with grass stains on her knees and determination in her eyes, when she asked if she should tell everyone the real reason Uncle James needed my kidney, everything I thought I knew about my family shattered into a million pieces. This is the story of how I almost gave my kidney to a drug dealer who happened to be my brother, how family pressure nearly cost me an organ, and how an 8-year-old girl had more courage than every adult in our family combined. Life as a single mom teaching 4th grade at Riverside Elementary wasn't glamorous, but Piper and I had built something beautiful together in our small 2-bedroom apartment on Maple Street. Every morning started the same way. Piper would shuffle into the kitchen in her dinosaur pajamas while I made scrambled eggs and toast. She'd sit at our little round table, swinging her legs and making observations that always caught me off guard. "Mom, why does Grandma Loretta always say family comes first but never visits us?" she asked one Thursday morning, exactly 1 month before everything fell apart. "She drives past our street to get to Uncle James's house." I set her plate down gently, buying time to think of an answer that wouldn't reveal my own hurt. "Grandma's just very busy, sweetheart. And Uncle James has a bigger house for hosting family dinners. But our apartment is cozy," Piper said, taking a bite of toast, "and you make better spaghetti than Uncle James." She was right about the spaghetti. I'd learned to cook from my Italian grandmother on my father's side, the one family member who'd treated James and me exactly the same. But being right didn't change the family dynamics that had been set in stone since my divorce 3 years ago. The divorce had been my scarlet letter in the Davidson family. When I left Piper's father after discovering his affair with his secretary, my mother acted like I was the one who'd committed a crime. "Marriage is work, Waverly," she'd said, sitting in my kitchen while I sobbed over custody paperwork. "You don't just give up when things get hard. But some things are supposed to be hard, and some things are supposed to break you." Watching my husband kiss another woman in our bed while our daughter napped in the next room was the second kind. The divorce was final within 6 months, and I got primary custody of Piper and a clear understanding of where I stood in the family hierarchy, at the bottom. James, meanwhile, could do no wrong. His real estate company, Prestige Properties, had signs all over town. He drove a Tesla, wore expensive suits, and donated to all the right charities. When relatives visited from out of state, they stayed in his guest rooms. When Mom needed help with her computer, she called James. When Dad wanted someone to watch the game with, he went to James's house with the 70-inch TV. My teaching salary kept us comfortable enough. $42,000 a year doesn't buy luxury, but it covered rent, groceries, and the occasional trip to the local amusement park. Piper never complained about wearing clothes from Target instead of the boutique stores her cousins shopped at. She never asked why we had a used Honda instead of something shiny and new. Our life had a rhythm that worked. Monday through Friday, I taught my students while Piper went to the same school. She was in 3rd grade, just down the hall from my classroom. After school, she'd do homework in my room while I graded papers. We'd drive home together, windows down if the weather was nice, singing along to whatever pop song was on the radio. Friday nights were pizza nights. We'd order from Antonio's, one large pepperoni that we'd eat while watching a movie on our secondhand couch. Saturday mornings meant cartoons and pancakes. Sunday was our adventure day. The park, the library, the free day at the local museum. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. My colleague Bethany understood our situation better than most. She'd been through her own divorce 5 years earlier and had emerged stronger. "Waverly, you're doing amazing," she told me one afternoon as we supervised recess. "That little girl adores you. She's always talking about the things you do together, the stories you tell her, the way you make even grocery shopping an adventure." Bethany was right. Piper and I had developed our own language, our own traditions, our own way of moving through the world. When the cashier at the grocery store was rude, we'd make up silly backstories about why they were having a bad day. When it rained on our park day, we'd build blanket forts and have indoor picnics. When money was tight at the end of the month, we'd have breakfast for dinner and pretend we were at a fancy French cafe. The Tuesday evening that changed everything started like any other. Piper was at the kitchen table working on her multiplication tables. I was making spaghetti with the good sauce, the one that simmered for 2 hours. The windows were open, letting in the sounds of kids playing in the street. Everything was normal, peaceful, exactly the way I liked it. Then my phone rang. Mom's contact photo appeared on the screen, a picture from James's wedding where she was beaming at him like he'd hung the moon. "Waverly, it's about James. You need to come to the hospital, now." The drive to Riverside General Hospital took 12 minutes, but it felt like 12 hours. Piper sat in the back seat clutching her math homework while I gripped the steering wheel and tried to process what Mom had told me. James had collapsed during a business presentation. His kidneys were failing. They needed family there immediately. The emergency room waiting area was already full of Davidsons when we arrived. Mom stood at the center like a general commanding troops, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the crisis. Dad sat quietly in a corner chair, his mechanic's hands folded in his lap. My cousin Nadine was there with her husband, and even Great-Aunt Meredith had driven down from Portland. "Finally," Mom said when she saw me, though I'd broken every speed limit to get there. "James is asking for you." The ICU was a world of beeping machines and harsh fluorescent lights. James lay in the narrow bed, and for the first time in my life, my big brother looked small. His skin had a grayish tint I'd never noticed before. Tubes ran from his arms to various bags of fluid. His eyes, usually so confident and commanding, were filled with fear. "Hey, Wave," he said, using my childhood nickname, the one he hadn't used since high school. "Thanks for coming." "What happened?" I sat in the chair beside his bed while Piper stood in the doorway, taking everything in with those observant eyes of hers. "My kidneys have been failing for 2 years," James admitted. "I didn't want anyone to know. Bad for business, you know. But today, my body just gave up. The doctors say I'm in complete renal failure. I need dialysis immediately and a transplant as soon as possible." Dr. Reeves, the head of transplant surgery, entered with a clipboard and a serious expression. He was tall and thin, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "The situation is critical," he explained. "James needs a kidney transplant within the next month, possibly sooner. We need to test all immediate family members for compatibility." The testing began that night. One by one, we were called back for blood draws, medical histories, and preliminary screenings. Mom went first, insisting she'd give both kidneys if it would save James. But her blood type was wrong, a negative when James needed O positive. Dad was the same. Nadine was type B. Aunt Meredith was too old and had diabetes. Then it was my turn. The nurse drew vial after vial of blood while Piper watched from a chair, her homework forgotten. "Will it hurt my mom?" she asked the nurse. "Just a little pinch," the nurse assured her. "Your mom's very brave." But bravery had nothing to do with what came next. The results came back the following morning. I was a perfect match. O positive blood type, excellent health, no underlying conditions. Even our tissue markers aligned in a way Dr. Reeves called remarkably compatible. Mom's relief was immediate and overwhelming. She actually hugged me for the first time in 3 years. "You're going to save him, Waverly. You're going to save your brother." The pressure started immediately. Mom practically moved into my apartment, filling it with her presence and her expectations. Every morning, she'd be there with articles about successful kidney donations. Every evening, she'd tell stories about family loyalty, about duty, about how the Davidsons always took care of their own. "When your grandfather broke his leg during harvest season, the whole family came to bring in the crops," she said one night, sitting at my kitchen table while Piper pretended to watch TV. "When Aunt Meredith had cancer, we all took turns driving her to chemotherapy. This is what we do, Waverly. This is who we are." But James and I hadn't been close in years. After my divorce, he'd made his position clear. "Maybe if you'd been a better wife," he'd said at a family dinner loud enough for everyone to hear. "A man doesn't stray unless something's missing at home." Now that same brother needed my kidney, and suddenly I was family again. Suddenly I mattered. Mom started including us in family group texts. Dad began stopping by to check on us. Even Carmen, James's perfect wife, called to thank me for considering the donation. "You don't have to do this," Bethany told me during lunch break at school. "Being related to someone doesn't mean you owe them an organ." But she didn't understand the weight of the Davidson family expectations. She didn't understand how Mom could make you feel guilty with just a look, how the entire family would turn against anyone who didn't fall in line. Piper understood, though. She watched everything with those careful eyes. She noticed how Grandma only brought groceries now that we were useful. She noticed how Uncle James suddenly remembered her birthday with an expensive gift. She noticed how the family that had ignored us for 3 years suddenly couldn't do enough for us. "Mom," she said one night, crawling into my bed, "are you going to give Uncle James your kidney?" "I don't know yet, baby." "I don't think you should," she said quietly. "Something's not right." 3 weeks of relentless pressure finally broke my resistance. James had started dialysis, spending 4 hours every other day hooked to a machine that cleaned his blood. His business was suffering. Carmen called me crying, saying she couldn't watch him deteriorate anymore. Mom had essentially moved into my apartment, her presence a constant reminder of my family obligation. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon. I'd taken a sick day to accompany James to his dialysis appointment. Watching him connected to that machine, his face pale and drawn, stirred something in me. Despite our differences, despite the years of being treated as less than, he was still my brother. The same brother who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd threatened my first boyfriend, who'd carried me home when I broke my ankle climbing trees. "I'm scared, Wave," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "The dialysis isn't working well. My body's rejecting it. Dr. Reeves says, without a transplant soon, I might have weeks, not months." That evening, I called a family meeting at my apartment. Mom, Dad, Nadine, and Carmen gathered in my small living room. Piper sat at the kitchen table, supposedly doing homework but listening to every word. "I'll do it," I announced. "I'll give James my kidney." The relief in the room was palpable. Mom actually cried, real tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. Dad nodded approvingly, the most emotion I'd seen from him in years. Carmen grabbed my hands, thanking me over and over. Even Nadine, usually so reserved, said I was doing the right thing. "You're a hero, Waverly," Mom declared. "A real hero. James will never forget this. The family will never forget this." But later that night, after everyone had left, Piper crawled into my bed with a troubled expression. "Mom, I need to tell you something." "What is it, sweetheart?" "Remember last month when we saw Uncle James at the mall? When he said he was at a business meeting in Chicago?" I remembered. We'd been shopping for school supplies when Piper spotted him outside a restaurant. He'd seemed flustered, quickly explaining he'd had to cancel his trip at the last minute. "He was with a woman," Piper continued. "They were kissing." "It wasn't Aunt Carmen." My stomach twisted. "Maybe you were mistaken, baby." "I wasn't. And there's more." She pulled out a small notebook from under my pillow, one of those composition books kids use for school. "I've been writing things down." The notebook was filled with her careful handwriting. Observations dated over the past 3 weeks. Uncle James on phone calls when he thought no one was listening. Conversations between Grandma and Grandpa about James's problems. Medicine bottles with different names. Screenshots she'd printed at the school library. "Piper, how did you get all this?" Uncle James gave me his phone to play games during his dialysis appointments. But I looked at his messages instead. "Mom, he's been lying about something big." I read through her notes, my hands shaking. References to someone named Derek. Mentions of inventory and distribution. Photos of prescription bottles with various names, none of them James Davidson. A text message from 2 weeks ago that made my blood run cold. Once I get the kidney, I can get back to full capacity. My sister has no idea what really caused this. "Mom, I Googled kidney failure causes at the library," Piper said. "Taking too many pills can destroy your kidneys. Uncle James has been taking lots of pills, different kinds, all the time. I wanted to dismiss it as a child's misunderstanding, but Piper had been methodical. She'd documented dates, times, and conversations. She'd taken photos of his medicine cabinet during our visits. She'd even recorded a conversation on her tablet, James talking to someone about keeping Waverly in the dark until after the surgery. The surgery was scheduled for Monday morning, just 3 days away. I'd already taken medical leave from school. My substitute was prepared. The preoperative appointments were complete. Everything was in motion. "What should I do, baby?" I asked Piper, this 8-year-old who'd become my wisest advisor. "Tell someone," she said simply. "Or let me tell them." But who would believe us? Mom would dismiss it as cold feet. James would deny everything. The family would say I was making excuses to back out. I needed more proof, but time was running out. That weekend, I went through the motions of preparation, the pre-surgery diet, the medical clearances, the paperwork, but I also did something else. I contacted James's ex-business partner, someone who'd left the company abruptly last year. I reached out to Carmen's sister, who'd made strange comments about James at Christmas. I started piecing together a picture that made my decision clear. Sunday night, the eve of surgery, I sat with Piper one last time. "If something seems wrong tomorrow, you know what to do?" She nodded, clutching the folder of evidence we'd compiled together. "I'll be brave, Mom. Just like you taught me." Monday morning arrived with a cold February rain beating against the hospital windows. I'd been at Riverside General since 5 a.m., going through final preparations. The surgical team had explained everything one more time. The incision, the removal, the recovery time, the lifetime of monitoring that would follow. I'd signed consent form after consent form, each signature feeling heavier than the last. James was already in the adjoining operating room, unconscious and prepped. Through the small window in the door, I could see him lying there, surrounded by masked figures in blue scrubs. In a few minutes, they'd put me under too, and when we both woke up, my kidney would be keeping him alive. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Martinez, checked my IV one final time. "Any last questions, Waverly?" Before I could answer, the double doors of the operating room burst open with such force that several nurses jumped. There stood Piper in her school uniform, navy blue jumper with grass stains on the knees, her hair still in the crooked braids I'd done yesterday. Behind her was Mrs. Chen, my 70-year-old neighbor, both of them breathless and soaking wet from the rain. "I'm so sorry," Mrs. Chen gasped, her hand pressed to her chest. "She said it was life or death. She said her mommy was in danger." Security immediately moved toward them, but Dr. Reeves held up his hand. Something in Piper's face, that fierce determination I knew so well, made him pause. "Mommy, should I tell everyone why Uncle James really needs your kidney?" The room went completely silent. You could hear the rhythmic beeping of machines, the hum of ventilation, but not a single person spoke. Dr. Reeves slowly removed his surgical mask, his eyes moving between Piper and me. "Let her speak," he said quietly. Piper stepped forward, her small voice filling the sterile room. "Uncle James has been selling prescription pills for 3 years. He's been using fake names to get medicines from different doctors and selling them to people. The kidney disease isn't from being sick. It's from taking too many pills himself." "This is absurd," someone said. "But doctor—" Reeves raised his hand again. Piper pulled out James's phone from her backpack. "I have proof. I sent everything to Mom's email and to the hospital's public email address this morning. Check your computers. Dr. Martinez was already at the workstation. There's an email here with attachments, screenshots of text messages, photos of prescription bottles, recorded conversations. Read the one from February 15th, Piper instructed. The one where he tells someone named Derek that once he gets Mom's kidney, he can increase distribution because he'll be healthy again. Dr. Martinez's face went pale as he read aloud, "Derek, stop worrying. My sister's kidney will have me back at 100% in 2 months. She has no idea the oxy caused this. Family guilt is a beautiful thing. Already have buyers lined up for the new inventory." The anesthesiologist set down her equipment. Several nurses stepped back from the operating table. Dr. Reeves's expression had transformed from confusion to horror. "We need to stop immediately," he announced. "If these allegations are true, this violates every ethical guideline for organ donation. The IEOS recipient cannot be engaged in illegal activities that cause their organ failure, and certainly cannot intend to continue those activities post-transplant." By now, the commotion had drawn others. Mom burst through the doors, her face twisted with rage. "What is happening? Why aren't you operating?" "Mrs. Davidson," Dr. Reeves said formally, "your granddaughter has presented evidence that James has been operating an illegal prescription drug ring and that his kidney failure is the result of substance abuse. We cannot proceed with this surgery." "Piper is lying," Mom screamed. "She's making this up. Waverly put her up to this because she's always been jealous of James." But Piper wasn't done. She pulled out a small tablet from her backpack and played a recording. James's voice, clear and unmistakable, filled the room. The beauty of using Wave is that she's so desperate for family approval, she'd never ask questions. 3 years of treating her like garbage, and now one emergency, and she's ready to hand over an organ. After the surgery, we go back to ignoring her, and I go back to business. The hospital's chief of staff had arrived, along with 2 security officers. "We're calling the police," he announced. "This operating room is now a crime scene. No one leaves until we sort this out." I sat up on the operating table, the anesthesia mask falling away. My hands were shaking as I looked at my 8-year-old daughter, standing there in her wet school uniform, facing down an entire room of adults. "How did you know to come here?" I asked her. "Mrs. Chen helped me," Piper said. "I told her everything last night. She said sometimes grown-ups need kids to save them from making terrible mistakes." Dr. Reeves approached me slowly. "Mrs. Davidson, I'm sorry. We should have investigated more thoroughly. Your daughter may have just saved your life in more ways than one." 6 months have passed since that morning in the operating room. James is now serving a 5-year sentence at the state correctional facility for prescription fraud, drug distribution, and identity theft. The investigation revealed he'd been running his pill operation through his real estate business, using vacant properties as distribution points and laundering money through fake property sales. He receives dialysis 3 times a week in the prison medical ward. The evidence Piper collected was just the tip of the iceberg. Once the police started investigating, they found 17 fake identities James had used to obtain prescriptions, 3 doctors he'd been bribing, and over $200,000 in illegal drug sales. His real estate company was seized by the government. Carmen filed for divorce the day after his arrest and moved back to her parents' house in Texas. Our family imploded completely. Mom still insists I should have given James the kidney anyway. That family loyalty should have trumped everything else. "He's your brother," she said during our last conversation. "You let him rot in prison when you could have saved him." Dad finally found his voice after 40 years of silence. He filed for separation 2 weeks after James's arrest. "I'm tired of pretending wrong is right, Loretta," he told her in front of the entire family. "Our grandson is a criminal because you never let him face consequences for anything. Waverly and Piper are the only ones in this family with any integrity left." He moved into a small apartment downtown and comes over for dinner every Sunday. Piper teaches him card games while I cook, and for the first time in my life, I actually know my father. He tells stories about his childhood, his dreams of being a pilot before he met Mom, how he wishes he'd stood up for me sooner. Piper and I transferred to Lincoln Elementary across town. Starting fresh where no one knew our story was exactly what we both needed. She's in therapy to process everything that happened, and Dr. Martinez says she shows remarkable resilience. Most adults wouldn't have had the courage to do what Piper did, she told me during our last session. She knew the adults in her life were making a dangerous decision, and she chose to act. That takes extraordinary bravery. The school district awarded Piper a citizenship award for her courage. The local newspaper wanted to do a story, but we declined. Some stories don't need to be public. Some victories are private, meant to be held close and treasured quietly. Last week, I received a letter from Carmen that brought me to tears. Waverly, your daughter saved more than just your kidney. She exposed a man I didn't really know. I found out James had been cheating on me for 2 years with multiple women, using drugs I didn't know he was taking, and planning to expand his drug operation after the transplant. You would have sacrificed an organ for someone who saw you as nothing more than a spare parts inventory. Piper protected you when the adults who should have protected you failed. But the most profound change is in my relationship with Piper. Every night when I tuck her in, we have the same exchange that's become our ritual. "Mom, are you proud of me?" she asks, even though she knows the answer. "You saved my life in more ways than one, baby. You taught me that family isn't about blind loyalty or sacrifice. It's about protecting the people who truly love you, even when that means standing up to the people who don't." She always smiles and adds, "And sometimes, Mom, the smallest voice in the room needs to be the loudest." The scar from the surgery prep remains on my abdomen, a 2-inch mark where they'd made the initial incision mapping. I don't hide it. When people ask, I tell them it's a reminder of the day I almost made the biggest mistake of my life, and how my 8-year-old daughter had more wisdom than every adult in the room. Family doesn't mean sacrificing yourself for someone who would destroy you without remorse. Blood relations don't automatically deserve your organs, your sacrifice, or your silence when they're doing wrong. Sometimes the greatest act of love is having the courage to say no, even when everyone expects you to say yes. True family protects you from harm, not leads you to it. And sometimes that protection comes from the most unexpected source. An 8-year-old girl with a composition notebook, a tablet, and the courage to burst through operating room doors. Piper saved my kidney, but more importantly, she saved me from a lifetime of being used by people who confused manipulation with love. She taught me that standing up for what's right isn't about being the loudest or the strongest. Sometimes it's about being the only one brave enough to speak the truth. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt pressured to sacrifice for family members who wouldn't do the same for you, please share this video. Leave a comment about a time when you had to choose between family expectations and your own well-being. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories about courage, truth, and the unexpected heroes in our lives.